Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. As the newscaster's sound could be heard faintly, Lucian knew Roxanne should have heard about his engagement. He studied her carefully but realized she seemed calm. Shortly after, he broke the silence. "I'm here to pay Essie a visit. How is she doing?" Roxanne stepped aside to allow him entry. "She's upstairs. I need to talk to you about her." They entered the living room one after another. Roxanne gestured for him to take a seat on the couch while she occupied a single couch aside. Catalina served them coffee and left after realizing they had something to discuss. "What is it?" Lucian's heart sank when he noticed her expression. Roxanne revealed calmly, "I agreed to let Essie stay here temporarily because of her condition. She is doing better these few days. She is also starting to talk. Compared to her past self, she has improved a lot. There is no need for her to remain here." She was telling him to bring Estella back home. Lucian's expression turned grim. "Since she's improving a lot here, she might recover completely if she stays here." "If it doesn't trouble you," Roxanne interjected swiftly, "I'm sorry. Essie's your daughter, so I believe she'll recover faster if she stays with you. I'm just a stranger to her after all." Lucian's brows puckered when he realized she was determined. "Why the sudden decision? I thought you were taking care of her well?" Roxanne met his gaze and flashed a sarcastic grin. "I'm not obliged to take care of someone else's daughter. Previously, I agreed to take care of her as she was sick. I've done what I could. Mr. Farwell, you should know when to stop. We're not even related, so you shouldn't force me to take care of your daughter." Glancing at the TV, which was still playing the news, she added icily, "Besides, I don't want to get involved with a married man and risk getting accused of being a homewrecker one day." Lucian gazed at the TV silently. He couldn't utter a single word in rebuttal. Since he did not deny it, Roxanne assumed she was right. Her voice grew frosty. "I've been busy with work recently, and taking care of your daughter will merely add to my burden. I don't want to force myself, so please don't make things difficult for me and bring her back as soon as possible." Roxanne's face was devoid of expression as she said that out loud. Averting her gaze, she said nothing else as her nails dug into her palms. She only made up her mind hastily after Lucian arrived. Lucian is about to marry Aubrey. If Essie remains here, he'll often show up. That is not right. It's best to keep a distance from him rather than cause a misunderstanding in the future. Sensing her intention, Lucian frowned. "Didn't you say that the kids are innocent?" Pitch out flinching, Roxanne replied, "I won't stop Archie and Benny from being friends with Essie. Essie is welcome to play with them anytime." The silence lasted for a while, but eventually Lucian broke it. "As you wish." Roxanne nodded and walked up the stairs to get Estella. All three kids were hanging out in Archie and Benny's room at the time. Everyone was upset and the atmosphere in the room was grim. Archie and Benny were playing with their respective robot toys, whereas Estella had buried her head into her plush toy's tummy. All three were immersed in their own worlds. When they heard the door opening, all three of them unanimously shifted their attention toward the door. Roxanne softened her stance when she looked into their eyes. However, she later thought about the man waiting downstairs and became resolute again. She said calmly, "Essie, your dad is here to pick you up." All three kids were stunned to hear that. Estella, in particular, bulged her eyes that were shining with confusion while she hugged her plush toy, not moving a muscle. Roxanne looked down as she repeated stiffly, "Your dad is waiting downstairs, so hurry along now." After saying all that, she moved to the side and waited quietly by the door. "Miss Jarvis," murmured Estella. Her voice suggested that she was a little scared and extremely reluctant to leave. Roxanne forced herself to look away from the kid's face. She did not dare to say a word because she worried that she would ask the kid to stay the second her lips parted. It took some time before the kid finally made her way to the door. Roxanne couldn't help stroking her hair, then held her hand as they walked down the stairs together. Lucian had already gotten up from the couch by then, and he had one hand in his pocket as he stood in the middle of the living room. It seemed like he was ready to take Estella away as soon as she showed up. Roxanne held Estella's hand until they were off the last step. After that, she spoke in a sweet voice, "Go on, then." Having said that, she let go of Estella's hand. Estella stared at her father, then at the beautiful lady beside her. The kid's eyes shone with dissatisfaction and reluctance. She only took 2 steps forward before she suddenly turned back around and hugged Roxanne's leg tightly, refusing to let go. Roxanne's heart melted and turned into a messy mush as she reached out her hand. At first, she wanted to stroke Estella's head to offer her some comfort, but her hand stopped midair before it reached for Estella's hands and gently pried them away from her leg. "Be good and go home with your dad. I will be very busy in the coming days, and you know that." As if she sensed something amiss about the situation, Estella used her tiny hands to grab Roxanne's skirt and shook her head fervently. "No. No going home." Lucian frowned a little when he heard what the kid said. At the same time, his eyes gleamed with surprise and a hint of bitterness. She needs her mother so badly, but that woman has no intention of taking care of her. Roxanne shifted her gaze to the man standing right there and prayed that he would say something. However, Lucian merely stood there with a stoic expression. He stared at the two of them but seemed to have no intention of helping at all. Roxanne retracted her gaze when she saw that, following which, she crouched down to look at Estella's cute face. Tears filled up Estella's eyes as she pouted aggrievedly and looked at Roxanne longingly. "I want to stay with you." Roxanne's gaze softened upon hearing that. At the end of the day, she couldn't bear to see the kid crying, so she patiently cooed, "Be good, Essie. I know you like me. I enjoy spending time with you too, but I have been really busy and tired lately. If you wish to help me, then be good and go home with your dad, okay?" "I want to stay with Ms. Jarvis," murmured Estella stubbornly as she bit her lip. "There's no saying if I can see Ms. Jarvis again if I go home with Daddy now." When Roxanne looked into Estella's eyes, she realized what the kid was thinking, and for a minute there, Roxanne didn't know what to say. She remained quiet for a few minutes before she smiled and said sweetly, "I will always be here, and you can drop by any time you want, okay?" However, Estella didn't quite buy those words. Meanwhile, Lucian misread the situation and thought that Roxanne only said those words to chase Estella away. Hence he sternly reminded Estella Farwell, "Have you forgotten that this is not your home?" Estella slowly lowered her head before turning around and walking to her father right away. With that, the door to the mansion slowly closed and Estella's tiny figure was gone from Roxanne's sight. Missing the little girl dearly, Roxanne took a deep breath and forced her tears back in. They had spent quite some time together, and the kid had obviously grown fond of her and the boys. On top of that, her illness showed evident signs of improvement. If at all possible, Roxanne wished that she could continue to stay with Estella and take care of the latter until she had completely recovered. How I wish I could hear her say a full sentence. Unfortunately, it seemed that was no longer possible. As Archie and Benny walked down the stairs after Roxanne and Estella, the boys could tell that their mother was sad to send Estella away. Although they too felt the same, they kept their words to themselves. When they saw how saddened their mother was, they snuggled up in her arms and promised, "Don't be sad, Mommy. We promise we will always be with you." Roxanne hugged the cuddly kids in her embrace, and her heart slowly became filled with warmth once more. Although she was reluctant to part with Estella, her challenging job made it impossible for her to deal with other matters as she was preoccupied with her work every day. On that fateful day, Roxanne followed her routine and left the research facility when it was time to pick up her kids from kindergarten. When she was on her way, she received a call from Larry. Roxanne picked up the call. "Hi Larry, what's up?" Larry sounded a little troubled when he spoke on the other end of the line. "Are you free to talk?" I'd like to ask for a favor. Roxanne could tell that something was off, so she agreed to help him without hesitation. Ask away. Larry replied, "It's easier if we talk in person. I'll send you a location later. Let's meet there." Roxanne agreed to meet up and hung up the call. After that, she sped up and drove quickly to the kindergarten to pick up her kids. Upon dropping them off at her home, she asked her friend to babysit them, then hurried off to meet Larry at the restaurant he picked. Larry was already there when she arrived, and he had a grim expression on his face. "Sorry for asking you to come here out of the blue," said Larry when he saw her sitting down. Roxanne didn't mind, so she grinned. "It's fine. I'm free tonight anyway. So, what do you need my help for?" While they were talking, a server showed up to serve their dishes so that they could eat while they chatted. "Initially, I planned to only stay here for a short while, but an elderly member of my extended family suddenly developed an illness in his brain. I'm the only medical practitioner in the family, so I stayed behind to help out," said Larry. "I've read his medical file and he needs a craniotomy. Unfortunately, he is getting too old and the risk involved is rather high. The success rate is only 20%. They both worked in the healthcare industry, so Larry could explain the patient's situation in a few short sentences. Those few words also allowed Roxanne to understand what Larry wanted her help with. "We worked together on several occasions when we were living overseas, and of all the doctors I know, you are the most skilled one in this field. That is why I was hoping." Larry trailed off as he became hesitant. After all, craniotomy was a difficult and risky procedure, so the surgeon performing the task would have to endure tremendous stress. Roxanne had no obligation and didn't need to take a risk like that. Nevertheless, she understood that Larry was worried about her being burdened by the risk involved. Hence, she didn't bother waiting for him to finish his sentence and immediately said, "Where is the patient now? If possible, I think I should go check his condition in person." "It's as you said. I specialize in this field, so I might be able to come up with another solution. Who knows? Maybe we can avoid surgery entirely." Larry was still pondering how to finish his sentence when her words prompted a bewildered glint to flash past his eyes. Did she agree to help out just like that? "If it's fine with you, I can free up some time tomorrow and drop by the hospital to examine the patient," suggested Roxanne after she thought about her work schedule for the next few days. Larry came back around and quickly nodded. "Okay, then I'll be counting on you. If you ever need anything in the future, please feel free to let me know." Roxanne grinned. "It's fine. You've helped me a lot while we were living overseas. Besides, it is our duty as doctors to help the sick. Since you believe that I can do this, there's no reason for me to back down." The two of them chatted a little longer before they settled on a time for Roxanne to visit her patient. On the following afternoon, Roxanne finished up her work at the Research Institute and went to meet up with Larry right away at the entrance of the hospital. "I spoke to the rest of my family, so I will be the only one staying overnight here. You don't need to feel pressured at all," said Larry. He then led her to the hospital room. Lying on the sickbed was an elderly man whose hair had been shaved. He was still unconscious at the time. He had gotten ill suddenly, so the color on his face hadn't faded yet. That was why he looked as though he was an ordinary elderly man who was simply sleeping. "Are you Janet?" asked the medical experts in the room, who were in charge of treating the elderly man. Larry had shared Roxanne's alias with the others before he even dropped by. Those medical experts had long heard about the renowned Janet, and they were surprised to see such a young woman standing behind Larry. Most of them even wondered if there was something wrong with their eyes. Roxanne nodded slightly, then turned her attention to the patient. "Sorry, but now's not the time to exchange pleasantries. Please tell me more about the patient's condition. Also, please allow me to perform a few examinations." The medical experts turned to Larry to get his approval when they saw how professionally she acted. Larry nodded in response. With his approval, the medical experts quickly helped Roxanne. They showed her the patient's medical report and helped her perform some examinations. They worked for hours before Roxanne finally had the full picture of her patient's condition. She couldn't help feeling disheartened by what she had learned. Unfortunately, she had to admit that the patient's case was tough even for someone as skilled as herself. "What do you think? Can you help him?" asked Larry in a concerned tone. Roxanne's expression turned grim. "I need some time to figure this out. He can hold out for 2 more days, and I will use that time to hold a conference to discuss his condition." Larry trusted her, so he nodded and agreed to let her work her magic. Roxanne ended up spending most of her time at the hospital over the next 2 days. She discussed the matter with a few domestic experts who were renowned in that field. After that, she came up with a new medical proposal, but even then, the chances of success were only 40%. On the day of the surgery, Roxanne dropped her kids off at the kindergarten early in the morning. She hurried to the hospital immediately after to confirm the surgical procedure with the other experts. The preparation for the surgery was done following that. The surgery would begin at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and if everything went smoothly, the entire process would take about 5 or 6 hours. That would give her just enough time to go pick up her kids. Roxanne's confidence caused her to dismiss the idea of asking Lisa to pick up the kids. Soon it was 1 o'clock and the surgery began officially. Roxanne and the other medical experts worked diligently as they operated on the patient. Everyone was going all out to make this case one of the 40% of cases that ended in success. Unfortunately, their patient truly was too old, and an unexpected complication arose during the surgery. The medical experts had never dealt with anything like that before, so they panicked for a minute there. Roxanne was worried as well, but she forced herself to calm down and continued operating on her patient. Before she even knew it, the surgery had already gone on for over 7 hours. By then, all the other kids in the kindergarten had already left, and only 3 kids remained. Estella had moved out of their house, but Archie and Benny still treated her the same way they did when she was staying with them. The boys noticed that no one was there to pick Estella up, so they took her to the sandbox. All 3 of them then built a sandcastle together and were having so much fun. When Lucian showed up, he saw the 3 kids crouching in the sandbox. Their laughter filled the small playground in the kindergarten. "Essie," said Lucian, who waited until all 3 had finished playing before he called out to his daughter. However, Estella was reluctant to leave as she stared at her 2 friends, even though her dad had already called out to her. Lucian frowned and turned his attention to Archie and Benny. "Where's your mom?" The boys didn't like him, but they still stood up politely. Reluctant to answer Lucian's questions, Archie pouted and turned his head to the side to stare at the tiny sandcastle they had built earlier. Benny, on the other hand, had an innocent look on his face. He answered, "Mommy has an important surgery to perform today. She is probably dealing with something troublesome, and that is why she's not here yet." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and saw the look on Archie's face. That prompted Benny to quickly add, "But, she should be here soon. Bye, Mr. Farwell." "Bye, Essie." Nodding, Lucian reached out to hold Estella's hand and leave, but to no avail. Estella had tilted her head down and backed away a few steps. At that moment, she was standing behind Archie and Benny, shaking her head at her father. The boys realized that Estella refused to leave, so they turned around to coo her. But no matter how hard they tried to convince her to go home, Estella stubbornly shook her head. She even clutched onto their bags and insisted, "Stay together." Estella had been rather harsh to Lucian ever since he took her away from Roxanne's place. The kid would cry endlessly at every trivial matter, and that made Lucian raise his white flag. At that point, he no longer dared to force her to do things she didn't want to. Hence, he had no choice but to give in by nodding and saying, "I'll wait here with you boys." With Lucian around, the kids couldn't play as freely as they did before. All they did was sit quietly on the bench. After they waited for about an hour, the sky was turning dark. Yet Roxanne was nowhere to be seen. Lucian frowned a little as he fished his phone out of his pocket to call Roxanne. He made several consecutive calls but no one picked up. I guess she is still in the operating room. Lucian checked the time before shifting his attention to the kids. Are you hungry? I'll get everyone some food. Hearing that, Estella turned to look at both Archie and Benny with anticipation gleaming in her eyes. Archie, however, grabbed the strap of his backpack and shook his head with a scowl on his face. We're going to wait for Mommy. Mr. Farwell, please go ahead and take Essie home. When Benny heard what Archie said, he forced himself to ignore his hunger and nodded in agreement. I'm sure Essie is hungry, so please take her home quickly, Mr. Farwell. The glint in Estella's eyes dimmed instantly. She stubbornly shook her head at her father and said, not hungry. I will stay with Archie and Benny if they're not leaving. I want to keep them company. Lucian couldn't help feeling a headache coming. Even after he tried to talk some sense into the kids, all three of them remained adamant about staying put. Left with no choice, Lucian ordered Caden, who was waiting right outside, to buy them some food and deliver it over. Thank you, Mr. Farwell, but we're not hungry, lied Archie as he stubbornly turned Lucian's offer down. Meanwhile, Benny caressed his tummy pitifully and echoed his elder brother's words. At that point, Lucian could more or less guess the reason behind that hostility. The incident from before must have left a bad impression on the kids and made them hate me. Ah, they're so frustrating. I specially bought these for the two of you. If neither of you will eat it, then I have no choice but to throw it away, said Lucian, pretending to look for a trash can after that. The boys hesitated for a moment, but at the end of the day, they didn't want the food to go to waste, so they accepted it. The sky had already turned dark when Roxanne left the operating room. She saw the night sky and suddenly realized that she was late to pick her kids up, so she quickly changed her clothes and rushed to the kindergarten. At the entrance of the kindergarten, she saw from a distance that a guy with a hand in his pocket was standing beside a bench. The kids were sitting together and eating their burgers with their heads down. Roxanne couldn't help stopping short when she saw that. It seemed like Lucian could sense her gaze because he looked up and took a glance at her. After that, he shifted his attention to the kids and told them something. All three of them then simultaneously turned to her. Each of them had a half-eaten burger in their hands when they ran to her. Feeling apologetic, Roxanne crouched down and stroked the kids' heads. I am so sorry for being late. Archie and Benny were used to her being late, so they didn't mind and shook their heads when they heard what she said. They were actually worried about her. Mommy, have you been working all this time? Are you tired? Not at all, replied Roxanne while grinning. Despite her words, her body was actually exhausted. If it weren't for her kids, she wouldn't even have the strength to lift her arm. Years ago, a complication occurred when she gave birth to her kids, and she lost a lot of blood. As a result, she had been frail and weak. It was also why she would be exhausted every time she operated for an extended period and would need to rest a lot to recuperate. Why is Essie? Asked Roxanne as she stared at Estella in confusion. Lucian is already here to pick her up, so why hasn't she gone home yet? Or, did he stay out of the courtesy to take care of Archie and Benny? Conflicting emotions welled up in Roxanne when she came to that conclusion. No one knew when Lucian had made his say to them, but when he heard that question, he answered in an even tone. Essie refused to leave them behind. Roxanne couldn't help being taken aback when she heard that. A self-mocking thought ran past her mind immediately after. I tried calling you earlier, but you didn't pick up, said Lucian. Right then, Roxanne came back around. She stood up to look right into his eyes and forced a smile. I turned my phone off and didn't see your calls until I was out of the operating room. Thank you for taking care of Archie and Benny. Lucian frowned a little when he realized that Roxanne was slightly pale. It's only right for me to do that. After all, you took care of Essie for such a long time. The two of them didn't have much to say to each other, and Roxanne was truly exhausted, so she exchanged some pleasantries with him before putting some distance between them and nodding. "Okay, I'll take Archie and Benny home now." The two boys then politely bid goodbye to Lucian. Estella, however, kept staring at Roxanne with her big, round eyes. The little girl didn't want to part with her just like that. When she saw the look on Estella's face, Roxanne's heart melted, and she crouched down to stroke Estella's head. "Be good, Essie, and go home with your daddy. Archie and Benny will play with you again tomorrow, okay?" Only then did Estella nod obediently and reply in her baby voice, "Bye-bye, Miss Jarvis." "See you tomorrow," replied Roxanne, whose heart softened even more when she heard Estella's adorable voice. After saying that, Roxanne held her boy's hands and left. Lucian's gaze was indecipherable when he watched all three of them leave. That was the first time they interacted again after he took Estella home. "That woman is treating me the way she did when we first met. If I hadn't helped take care of the two boys, she likely wouldn't have bothered to talk to me at all." Estella waited for a while, but her father just stood there without budging, so she swung his arm in confusion. Only then did Lucian return to his senses. He picked his daughter up and walked toward the exit. Back at the mansion, Lisa had been waiting for them to return and have dinner for quite some time. When she saw everyone entering the house, she hurried to them and asked, "What happened? Why is everyone home so late?" Roxanne forced a smile and answered, "It's nothing. I had to work overtime. Please babysit the kids. I'm a little tired, so I think I'll go to bed now." When Lisa saw how pale and tired Roxanne looked, she agreed to babysit right away. Roxanne cooed her kids a little, then retired to her own room. When Lisa finished making breakfast the next morning, she realized that Roxanne was still nowhere to be seen. The kids, on the other hand, had already made their way downstairs. They even dressed themselves up. "You boys eat away. I'll go check on your mother," said Lisa. She was a little worried when she recalled how tired Roxanne looked the previous night. However, the kids stopped her in her tracks when they heard what she said. "There is no need for that. Mommy is always tired after she has performed surgery. Let her sleep in. Wake her up only if she is still asleep in the afternoon." Lisa hesitated for a moment, but she eventually agreed to do as they said. She made sure the boys had their breakfast, then took them to the kindergarten. It was rather late by the time she got home, but Roxanne was still sleeping. Nevertheless, Lisa decided that she wouldn't disturb Roxanne. She simply made some oatmeal so that the latter had something to eat when she woke up. Roxanne sprung up from her bed immediately after she woke up and saw the time. "It's 11 o'clock and the kids are late." She was about to kick her blanket off when she recalled that she had already hired a housekeeper. The kids are probably at school already. Strangely, Roxanne felt drained after she relaxed. She rested on her bed for a while before someone knocked on her door. "Miss Jarvis, are you up?" asked Lisa. She had waited for an entire morning and was quick to check on Roxanne when afternoon came around. Roxanne replied, "Yeah, I'm up. I'll be right out." She didn't realize that her voice had become hoarse until she finished speaking. "Do I have a fever?" Nevertheless, Roxanne didn't pay much attention to it. She got out of bed and freshened up before going downstairs to have some food. However, her fatigue became more apparent when she walked. "Miss Jarvis, why is your face all red?" asked Lisa in a surprised tone as she served Roxanne the bowl of oatmeal she had prepared. Roxanne frowned and spoke a beat later, "I think I might have a fever. Please find some medicine for me." In a panic, Lisa quickly searched the medical kit and gave Roxanne some pills. Although she didn't have any appetite, she forced herself to have some food before she returned to her room to rest. Roxanne hadn't expected herself to fall sick so easily. "I only performed one surgery. I can't believe that is all it takes to wear me out so much that I've fallen ill. When did I become so weak?" Maybe because she had a fever, her mind became fuzzy soon after. A flurry of thoughts flashed past her mind and she fell asleep. That night, Lisa noticed that Roxanne was still resting and guessed that the latter hadn't recovered. Hence, she went to the kindergarten to pick the boys up. When she reached the place, she saw Estella hanging out around the boys. Disappointment flashed past Estella's eyes when she saw Lisa there. Archie and Benny knew that Estella missed their mommy and worried that she would refuse to go home like she did the day before. Hence, one of them took the initiative to ask, "Where is mommy?" Lisa was worried about Roxanne, who was all alone at home at the time. Hearing that question brought a worried frown to Lisa's brows. "Ms. Jarvis is sick and is resting at home. Let's hurry back." Both boys became anxious when they heard that. They had assumed their mommy would recover soon after resting for a bit. Just like usual. They didn't expect her to be so tired that she fell ill. Estella refused to go home with him because she wanted to see Roxanne. That was why Lucien had no choice but to wait at a corner. Never had he expected to hear such news. Estella gave Lucien an anxious look and grabbed his sleeve. "Ms. Jarvis," Lucien knew what his daughter wanted to ask, so he helped her finish her question. "What happened to Ms. Jarvis?" Lisa, who knew nothing about their story, told them what happened to Roxanne. "Ms. Jarvis hadn't been feeling well when she got home last night. I thought she was exhausted, but when I checked on her at noon, she had already come down with a fever. I have to get back to take care of her now." She then held the boys' hands and left. Archie and Benny left in haste and did not even bid Estella goodbye. Estella's eyes started turning red. She could not help but mumble in a soft voice, "Ms. Jarvis." Lucien looked at the little girl and hesitated for a moment. He then asked his driver to follow Lisa's car so that they could visit Roxanne. The boys were so worried about their mother that they ran straight into her room. They did not even say anything when Lucien came into the house. Lisa did not stop Lucien and Estella from going upstairs either. Roxanne was woken up by the boys when they opened the door. She opened her eyes and saw two pairs of doe eyes staring at her. "Mommy, how are you? You must be feeling very uncomfortable." Archie touched her forehead and was taken aback by the heat. Roxanne responded with a comforting smile. "It's just fever. It'll go away once I have enough sleep." Suddenly she heard a little girl's voice. "Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne froze for a bit. She tilted her head aside and saw Estella fussing with the edge of the bedsheet and gave Roxanne a worried look. "Essie? Why is she here?" Instinctively, Roxanne looked in the door's direction and saw a slender figure standing by the entrance. After meeting her gaze, the man frowned and entered the room. "High fever?" With mixed emotions surging in her heart, Roxanne looked away and said calmly, "It's not a big problem. I'm a doctor, so I know my body well. I'll get better once I get enough sleep." Lisa could not help but refute, "You've been sleeping for almost 24 hours, but you still didn't get better. Why don't you go to the hospital?" The man narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Roxanne clenched her fists for a second, but she was so dizzy that she could not think of a way to say no to the suggestion. She knew she had a high fever. In fact, she waited for Lisa to come home so they could go to the hospital together. Never did she expect Lucien to be there. Archie and Benny, too, were worried about their mother. "Mommy will go to the hospital with you. You'll feel better once the doctor gives you a jab. You'd always give us a jab whenever we have a fever." The boys then grabbed her hands and helped her sit up. Estella was so exasperated that her eyes turned red. Seeing how anxious the kids were, Roxanne had no choice but to listen to them. She nodded and looked at Lisa. "Could you come with me to the hospital?" The two boys insisted on accompanying her, but Roxanne turned them down with a frown. "You boys just stay home and rest, okay? I'll be back very soon." She did not want her children to go out at this hour. Before Lisa could say yes, Lucien's deep voice emerged from the back. "I'll take you. Lisa can stay home and take care of the kids." Upon hearing his suggestion, Roxanne was a little apprehensive. She wanted to stay away from Lucian, but she had to admit that was the best solution. A few seconds later, Roxanne nodded. "Thanks." Lucian nodded. After asking Archie and Benny to move aside, she got up from her bed. But before she could stand still, her head started spinning. She staggered and pressed her hand on the bed to steady herself. "Let me help you." Lisa immediately walked toward her to grab her arm. Roxanne's vision darkened for a few seconds. When her vision recovered a few seconds later, she responded with a weak nod. She did get noticed. The three little children, too, got up to her and walked by her side. Roxanne was so frail that she had to lean on Lisa when she walked. Even Lisa had difficulty supporting her. Upon noticing that, the three children wanted to help. Before they could extend their hands, a towering figure stood in their way. Lucian stood in front of Lisa and frowned. "Let me. You take care of the kids." Before Roxanne could react, Lucian wrapped his hands around her waist and carried her in his arms. At that time, Roxanne was still in a daze as she had brain fog. By the time she came to her senses, she put up a struggle but to no avail. The man was clearly in control of the situation. Roxanne had no choice but to stop struggling. She knitted her brows and expressed her dismay. "Put me down. I can walk." Her request fell on deaf ears. Lucian turned to Lisa and said, "Please whip up something for the kids. They haven't eaten anything so far. Put them to bed first if we come back late." Lisa agreed, but the three children were not pleased with the arrangement. They followed the adults to the car and tried to crawl into the passengers' seats. After putting Roxanne into the car, Lucian turned around, grabbed the little ones, and removed them from the car. Archie, Benny, and Estella sulked while looking at the woman in the car. "She'll be worried if you insist on following, and that's not good for her recovery. She'll be relieved to know that all of you stayed home, ate your dinner, and turned in early," Lucian explained patiently. The three little ones cast a doubtful look at Roxanne. Roxanne put on a faint smile and said, "Yes. Sleep early and don't wait for us." The children had no choice but to nod. Lucian got into the car, sat beside Roxanne, and closed the door, blocking the children's view of the car's interior. He then instructed the driver to rush to the hospital. After sending them off, the children reluctantly returned to the mansion with Lisa. Roxanne kept looking at the children from the rearview mirror and was relieved when they all headed back to the house. The warm and cozy atmosphere in the car made Roxanne want to fall asleep, but when she thought of the man sitting next to her, she forced herself to stay awake. Due to her fever, despite trying her best to stay awake by digging her nails into her palms, she soon fell into a deep slumber. "How do you feel?" Lucian expressed his concern as they were caught in a traffic snarl. When he did not get a reply, he looked to the side and noticed the woman was sound asleep. Overwhelmed by complicated emotions, Lucian looked away and ordered the driver, "Drive slower." Soon, he felt a weight on his shoulder. Lucian turned around and looked at the side of the woman's sleeping face with a subtle gentleness in his eyes. Roxanne slept throughout the journey. She did not wake up even when they arrived at the hospital. Lucian hesitated for a moment and decided not to wake Roxanne up. After instructing the driver to open the door, he covered the woman with his coat and carried her out of the car. The emergency department was the only place with people on duty since they arrived late at night. After registering at the counter, he carried Roxanne and headed to the department. Roxanne woke up when they entered the department. It took her a few seconds to realize she was in Lucian's arms. The doctor was looking at them from the opposite side. Roxanne's face immediately turned brick red, but no one could tell she was blushing because the fever had already caused her face to look flushed. "Put me down." She nudged the man in embarrassment. Lucian, who was listening to the doctor explain Roxanne's health condition, realized she had woken up when he heard her voice. He glanced at the woman but did not release her. Roxanne, who also heard the doctor's voice, fell silent and buried herself in his coat to avoid further embarrassment. The man's chest was so warm that Roxanne conked out again. She could vaguely hear the doctor's voice and Lucian's questions. He doesn't need to ask those questions in detail. I'm aware of the things the doctor said. After the consultation, the man woke her up. Lucian placed her on the bed and said, "You need to be on a drip, so you line to stay in the hospital for a night." Roxanne, who was still in a daze, nodded. She waited for the nurse to put her on a drip before sleeping like a log again. Lucian sat by the bed, looked at the woman's palm-sized face, and his expression dimmed slightly. I haven't seen her for 6 years, and she seems to have lost quite some weight. She looks even frilier now that she's ill. Despite carrying Roxanne in his arms and walking quite a bit, Lucian did not feel exhausted as she was as light as a feather. Did she even take good care of herself in the last 6 years? She even had to raise 2 kids all by herself. Roxanne woke up in the middle of the night and opened her eyes. She still felt a little dizzy and was a little lost. Everything that had happened before this was like a dream to her. Why is he treating me so well when he's about to marry another woman? While she was still in a groggy state, she heard someone breathing in the ward. Roxanne looked to the side and saw Lucian leaning on a chair. The chair was too tiny for his tall and muscular physique. Despite not being in a comfortable position, he could still sleep without a stir. She looked up at the IV drip bag and noticed it was replaced with a new one. Roxanne could not help but freeze for a moment. So it wasn't a dream. Lucian must be exhausted after taking care of me for the whole night. At that point, Roxanne was inundated by mixed feelings. She took a glance at the clock and realized it was midnight. Can't believe I've slept for so many hours. I wonder if the kids have slept well too. Roxanne took out her phone but hesitated when she was to text Lisa. I might disturb her sleep if I were to text her at this hour. She thought about it for a moment and put aside her phone. After spending a few hours resting in the hospital, Roxanne felt a lot better. She touched her forehead and felt her fever had also subsided. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.